A young woman endured daily beatings until a widowed Apache claimed her as his own Western love. She was only 18, with a slight frame and soft brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. Her eyes, once bright and full of curiosity, now held a quiet sadness that few people noticed. The small cabin she shared with her stepfather and younger siblings was nestled at the edge of the Arizona desert, where the sun beat down relentlessly during the day and nights grew bitterly cold. Every day felt like a battle to survive, and Sarah faced each morning with a sense of dread she could not shake. Her stepfather, Mr. Thompson, was a man hardened by life on the frontier. He had lost his own family years ago and carried his grief and anger like a heavy coat that never left him. Instead of kindness, he offered harsh words, unreasonable demands, and daily punishments. Sarah never understood why she bore the brunt of his anger more than anyone else in the household, but she learned early that resistance only made things worse. Each morning, she rose before dawn to help with chores, fetching water from the nearby creek, tending to the small garden that barely produced enough vegetables, and caring for her younger siblings. Even when she worked tirelessly, Mr. Thompson found reasons to scold her, or worse, to punish her physically. Despite the constant fear, Sarah had a quiet strength that few could see. She had learned to endure in silence, moving through each day with a careful balance of obedience and stealth. Her small acts of defiance, like sneaking a scrap of bread for a hungry sibling or tending to the wounded animals that wandered near the cabin, were her way of holding onto hope. Deep inside, she believed that life could be better, even if it seemed impossible at the moment. Sarah's world was small. Beyond the dusty trail that led to the nearest settlement, there was little to offer in terms of companionship or comfort. The neighbors were kind enough, but life on the frontier demanded caution. People had their own struggles and dangers to worry about, and the law was often too far away to offer protection. Sarah's stepfather was feared more than loved, and anyone who spoke out against him risked becoming a target themselves. So she kept her suffering mostly to herself, letting her tears fall in private, often late at night when the fire had died down and her siblings were asleep. The days were long, and each one seemed to bleed into the next without relief. Morning chores were followed by meals that were sparse and often cold. Afternoon work in the fields brought exposure to the harsh sun and dry wind, while evenings offered little more than a quiet dinner and the looming threat of her stepfather's temper. Sarah learned to move quickly, to speak softly, and to avoid drawing attention. She became an expert in disappearing into the background, a shadow in her own home. Yet, even in the midst of hardship, small moments of beauty and hope appeared like tiny sparks in the darkness. Sarah loved to watch the sunrise over the desert hills, where the sky turned shades of pink and gold before the harsh light of day set in. She found comfort in the songs of birds that visited the sparse trees near the cabin, and in the simple joy of a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. These small reminders of life beyond her suffering gave her the strength to keep going, even when it felt impossible. Her younger siblings looked up to her in ways that she didn't fully understand. They trusted her guidance, relied on her protection, and found comfort in her presence. This responsibility weighed heavily on Sarah, but it also gave her a reason to endure. Every day, she reminded herself that she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for them. Her love for them became a shield, allowing her to face her stepfather's anger with a resilience she did not know she possessed. Despite the isolation, Sarah's mind often wandered beyond the boundaries of the desert. She imagined what life might be like in a place where people were kind, where laughter filled the air, and where she could make choices without fear. She pictured herself walking through a town filled with children playing, merchants calling out their wares, and neighbors who helped one another without hesitation. These daydreams were bittersweet, reminding her of what she longed for, and what seemed forever out of reach. There were moments, however, when reality became almost unbearable. When her stepfather's temper flared, the punishments were relentless. Sarah learned to hide her fear, even when her hands shook and her heart raced. She discovered that endurance was not just about surviving physically, but also about protecting her spirit. She read quietly from a small, worn book she had hidden under her mattress, escaping into stories of distant lands, brave women, and people who overcame impossible odds. These stories became her lifeline, teaching her that courage could be quiet and that hope could survive even in the harshest conditions. The small creek near the cabin became Sarah's sanctuary. She would go there at dawn, carrying a bucket to fetch water, and pause to watch the reflection of the sky in the rippling surface. She would talk quietly to herself, imagining that someone, anyone, was listening, offering advice, or simply acknowledging her pain. Sometimes she would let her fingers trail in the cool water, letting the gentle current carry away some of her worry. It was in these moments that she allowed herself to breathe freely, even if only for a few minutes. Sarah's resilience was noticed, even if silently. The animals in the area seemed to sense her kindness. Stray dogs followed her quietly, and birds perched nearby as if offering company. Her small garden, though struggling, responded to her care, producing just enough vegetables to help feed the family. Each small success, each moment of peace, reminded her that she was capable of more than her stepfather's cruelty would allow. Yet, the shadow of fear never fully lifted. Even as she worked or found moments of calm, Sarah knew that at any moment her stepfather could appear, angry and unrestrained. She learned to read his moods, predicting when a day would be unbearable and when it might pass with only harsh words. She developed a careful routine, a set of small strategies to avoid triggering his wrath. Every action was calculated, every word measured, and every glance considered. Through it all, Sarah maintained a quiet determination. She refused to let her suffering define her. She imagined a future where she could walk freely, speak her mind, and live without fear. These thoughts, fragile as they were, became her secret rebellion against a life that had been unfairly cruel. She promised herself that she would not let despair take root, no matter how dark the days became. And so, Sarah Thompson endured. She faced each morning with courage, each afternoon with patience, and each night with quiet reflection. She carried her burdens with dignity, even when the weight seemed too heavy. Her spirit, though tested, remained unbroken, and her hope, though small, flickered steadily. Little did she know that her life, as difficult as it had been, was on the verge of a turning point, a moment that would bring change, protection, and an unexpected form of love into her world. The days continued to drag slowly for Sarah, each one blending into the next, until one afternoon changed the rhythm of her life in ways she could never have imagined. She was walking along the dusty path that led from her cabin to the nearby creek, carrying an empty bucket in her hands. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the desert landscape. Birds called overhead, and a gentle breeze lifted the scent of dry earth and wildflowers. Normally, these small details might have gone unnoticed in her constant worry over her stepfather's temper, but that day, Sarah felt an unusual sense of stillness. It was as though the desert itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As she approached a narrow curve in the trail, she saw a figure in the distance. At first, she thought it was one of the traveling merchants who occasionally passed through the area, but as the figure drew closer, she noticed the difference. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in clothing that seemed unfamiliar yet practical for the desert terrain. His dark hair fell in waves around his shoulders, and his eyes were sharp, alert, and full of an unspoken intensity. There was something in the way he carried himself, calm yet confident, that immediately caught Sarah's attention. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to greet him or keep walking. Her instincts, honed from years of fear, told her to be cautious. People in the frontier were often unpredictable, and strangers could be dangerous. But the man made no sudden movements. He walked slowly, deliberately, and he did not approach too closely. There was an air of respect in the distance he kept, and somehow that made Sarah feel less threatened. "Hello," the man said in a voice that was calm but firm. "I hope I am not disturbing you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She studied him carefully before responding. I am just getting water," she said softly, clutching her bucket. Her voice was cautious, careful not to sound too fearful but not too bold either. The man nodded, as if he understood without needing more explanation. "The creek is a good place," he said. "It provides what is needed and it is quiet. Many forget how important quiet can be." Sarah was surprised by the politeness in his words. She had not heard anyone speak like that to her in a long time. Most people either ignored her or spoke sharply, as if she were invisible or unworthy of kindness. There was something different about this man. His calm demeanor, the careful way he spoke, and the way he seemed to observe everything around him without judgment, it all made her pause. Over the next several days, Sarah began to notice the man appearing occasionally near the creek. Sometimes he was fishing in the shallow waters, other times he was simply sitting on a rock, watching the desert. He never intruded, never came too close, and yet his presence was noticeable. Sarah found herself wondering about him. Who was he? Why was he here alone in this vast, empty land? And most importantly, why did she feel a strange sense of comfort when he was near? One evening, as the sun began to sink below the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah found herself speaking to him for the first time. She had brought her bucket to the creek and had started filling it with water when he approached quietly, careful not to startle her. "Your steps are careful," he said, his voice gentle. "You carry weight even when your hands are empty." Sarah blinked. She did not fully understand what he meant, but there was no mockery in his tone. Instead, it felt like recognition, as if he could see more than what appeared on the surface. For a moment, she felt seen in a way she had not felt in years. I have responsibilities," she replied cautiously. "I have to care for my siblings and the home. There is always work to be done." He nodded again. "I understand. Life is demanding, but strength does not only come from enduring. It also comes from recognizing when help is near." Sarah considered his words. She had spent her entire life learning to survive alone, relying only on her own endurance. The idea that someone might offer help, or that she could accept it, was almost foreign. Yet there was a sincerity in his expression, a calm certainty that made her consider the possibility. Over the next several weeks, the two of them began to talk more often, always cautiously, always from a distance that felt safe. Sarah learned that his name was Chayton, and that he was a widower who had lived in the surrounding mountains for many years. He had experienced loss himself, having lost his family long ago, and had learned to live quietly and carefully in the desert. He shared stories of survival, of reading the land, understanding the winds, and observing the signs of animals. Through these stories, Sarah began to learn that the world beyond her small cabin was both dangerous and full of wisdom, and that sometimes strength came not only from enduring hardship but from learning and adapting. Chayton did not rush her. He understood that trust was not given easily, especially to someone like Sarah who had been hurt and frightened for most of her life. Instead, he showed his care in small ways, leaving a piece of dried meat near her path, pointing out which plants were safe to eat, showing her hidden spots by the creek where the water was pure and fresh. Every small gesture communicated a respect for her independence while offering protection without forcing it upon her. Sarah began to feel a sense of relief she had not known for years. It was subtle at first, a lighter step on the trail, a softer glance at the horizon, but it grew steadily. She started to anticipate Chayton's presence, not with fear or suspicion, but with curiosity and a quiet hope. Conversations that began with survival slowly shifted to stories of life, lessons from the past, and shared reflections on the beauty of the land around them. Sarah realized that, for the first time in years, she was not just surviving. She was noticing the world again, and she felt a small spark of freedom in that awareness. Despite the growing connection, Sarah remained cautious. Her stepfather's temper was always a threat, and she could not allow herself to trust anyone completely. Yet she found herself looking forward to her trips to the creek, eager to catch a glimpse of Chayton, to hear his calm voice, to feel a sense of safety she had never known in her own home. She began to imagine what it might be like to have someone stand by her, to protect her from harm and to understand her without judgment. One day, as she filled her bucket at the creek, Chayton spoke again, this time more directly. "You carry so much weight, Sarah. It is not yours to bear alone." She looked at him, startled that he knew her name. I have no choice," she said softly. "This is my life. I have to care for my family." He shook his head gently. "Life should not be only endurance. There are times when protection and guidance are gifts, and accepting them does not make you weak." Sarah considered his words carefully. For so long, she had equated independence with survival, believing that needing help was a sign of weakness. But Chayton's presence, his calm wisdom, and his careful respect for her choices began to challenge that belief. She realized that strength could come from accepting guidance, that trust could be a shield rather than a vulnerability. As the days passed, their cautious friendship continued to grow. Chayton never pushed, never demanded, and never judged. He offered his knowledge, his presence, and his quiet care, allowing Sarah to decide what to accept and when. Slowly, she began to let herself relax, to breathe a little more freely, and to imagine a life where fear did not dominate every moment. By the end of the month, Sarah began to feel a subtle change within herself. She no longer flinched at every sound. She no longer anticipated only harm, and she no longer felt entirely alone in a world that had once seemed so cruel. Chayton had not only become a companion at the creek, but also a symbol of hope, a reminder that kindness, respect, and understanding could exist even in the harshest conditions. For Sarah, this was more than just friendship. It was the first time in her life that she felt truly seen, understood, and valued. She had endured years of hardship, but now, in the presence of a man who recognized her strength and respected her spirit, she began to imagine a future that could be different, one where safety, trust, and even love might be possible. Little did she know that this cautious bond, built on respect, patience, and quiet observation, was the first step toward a life that would change her forever, a life where protection, partnership, and unexpected love would begin to fill the spaces that fear and suffering had once occupied. Life at the cabin remained tense for Sarah. Even as the days grew warmer and the desert sun stretched long shadows across the land, the weight of fear never left her. Each morning, she rose early to tend to the chores, and each evening, she returned with the memory of her stepfather's sharp voice and sudden outbursts echoing in her mind. Her younger siblings depended on her guidance and protection, and she carried that responsibility like a heavy stone in her chest. She had become a master of quiet endurance, moving carefully through each day as though her very survival depended on it, because it did. Yet the presence of Chayton near the creek offered her a rare and fragile relief. Over weeks, their cautious friendship had grown stronger, built on moments of conversation, shared observations, and the unspoken trust that had begun to form between them. Sarah had learned to anticipate his calm voice, to find comfort in his patient manner, and to take small lessons from the way he navigated the desert. Even in her home, where fear was constant, the thought that someone outside her immediate world cared for her safety brought a small, almost imperceptible spark of hope. Then came the day when her stepfather's anger crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. The sun had barely risen when he found Sarah attempting to gather water from a hidden spot behind the cabin, one she had discovered to avoid his watchful eyes. It was a small act of survival, but to him, it was an act of defiance. He roared in anger, sending a wave of fear through Sarah that tightened her chest and made her hands tremble. Words were exchanged, sharp and cruel, but the argument quickly escalated into a dangerous confrontation. For the first time, Sarah felt that her usual endurance, her careful silence, her quiet obedience, might not be enough to protect her. Her heart raced as he advanced toward her, a furious shadow against the morning light. Panic surged and she froze, unsure whether to flee or to defend herself. In that moment, the sound of footsteps approached from the nearby trail. Sarah barely recognized the figure until he was close enough that she could see the determination in his eyes. It was Chayton. Without hesitation, he stepped between Sarah and her stepfather, his presence commanding yet calm. "Step back," he said firmly, his voice steady and unwavering. There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet strength that seemed to ripple outward like a shield. "She is not yours to harm." Mr. Thompson, startled by the sudden appearance of a man he barely knew, paused for a moment. Anger and surprise contended on his face, and for the first time in years he was unsure of the outcome. Chayton did not speak again. He simply stood there, tall and unflinching, a barrier between Sarah and the danger she had faced every day of her life. Sarah's breath came in short gasps. She had never imagined anyone intervening on her behalf with such certainty. All the months of careful planning, silent endurance, and hidden survival had brought her to this moment, and now someone else, someone she trusted, was actively protecting her. Relief washed over her like a sudden rainstorm in the desert, leaving her both shaken and grateful. The confrontation did not last long. Mr. Thompson, recognizing that his intimidation had no effect against a man as calm and determined as Chayton, stepped back reluctantly. His eyes narrowed, but he left without another word, slamming the cabin door behind him in frustration. For the first time in years, Sarah was free from immediate threat, standing in the warm morning light with a man who had shown her protection without asking for anything in return. After the initial shock, Sarah turned to Chayton. Her voice was small, trembling with emotion she could hardly name. "I thank you," she whispered. She had said thank you many times in her life, but this one felt different, weighty with meaning and gratitude. It was not just for the act of protection, but for the idea that someone had recognized her worth, her courage, and her right to live without fear. Chayton looked at her with quiet kindness, his eyes softening. "You should not have to face danger alone, Sarah," he said gently. "No one deserves that. You have endured more than anyone should. I only helped because it was the right thing to do." In the days that followed, Sarah slowly began to process what had happened. The fear that had been a constant companion in her life had not disappeared entirely, but it had shifted. For the first time, she realized that danger could be met with support, that survival did not have to be a lonely burden. She began to see Chayton not just as a protector, but as a guide, someone who could teach her how to navigate the world with more confidence and less fear. Their relationship began to evolve in subtle ways. Chayton showed her how to read the land, teaching her how to notice changes in the wind, to track animals, and to understand which plants were safe to eat. He taught her the importance of observation and patience, of quiet strength, and of choosing one's actions with care. Sarah absorbed these lessons eagerly, finding that each new skill gave her a sense of control and independence she had never known before. Yet, it was not only practical knowledge that Chayton offered. He shared stories of his own life, of loss and survival, and of the ways he had learned to live with both sorrow and hope. Sarah listened closely, feeling a strange kinship with someone who had also faced hardship and loss. His stories were not filled with exaggeration or bravado, but with honesty and reflection. They showed her that life could be endured, yes, but it could also be understood and appreciated, even in its harshest moments. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple over the desert horizon, Sarah found herself sitting beside Chayton near the creek. The water shimmered in the fading light, and the air was filled with the soft calls of birds returning to their nests. They spoke quietly, not about danger or chores, but about dreams, about small joys, and about what it meant to find peace in a world that often seemed unkind. "You have changed," Chayton said softly, noticing the way Sarah's posture was less tense, her movements less hurried. "You are stronger than you realize." Sarah smiled faintly, a small flicker of warmth in her chest. I feel safer," she admitted. "Not just because you helped me, but because I feel like I can breathe, even for a little while." Chayton nodded. Safety is not always about walls or fences. Sometimes it comes from trust, from understanding, and from knowing that someone will stand with you when you cannot stand alone. For Sarah, these words were transformative. They marked a turning point in her life, a moment when she realized that her endurance, while admirable, was not the only way to survive. Strength could also come from accepting care, from allowing another person to be a companion in her journey, and from recognizing that protection and support were not weaknesses, but gifts. The bond between them deepened over the following weeks. Chayton continued to guide her, teach her, and protect her, always with patience and respect. Sarah began to notice subtle changes in herself. Her fear no longer ruled her every decision, her steps were lighter, and her heart was more open to the possibility of hope. She discovered that she could still be strong, still be capable, and still care for her siblings. But now she had someone by her side who made the weight of the world feel a little lighter. Then came the first time Sarah realized that her feelings for Chayton went beyond gratitude. It happened during a quiet evening at the creek, when he had taught her how to identify edible plants growing in the sandy soil. She watched him move with ease, confidence, and care, and felt a warmth in her chest that was unfamiliar yet comforting. She realized that she trusted him completely, that his presence made her feel safe not just physically, but emotionally as well. For the first time in her life, Sarah dared to imagine a future that was different from her past. She pictured a life where she did not wake each morning in fear, where she could speak freely, laugh without caution, and be herself without hiding behind shadows. And she understood that Chayton had not only protected her body, but had also begun to protect her spirit, a gift she had never known she could receive. This realization was both exhilarating and frightening. Sarah had spent her entire life learning to depend only on herself, to endure alone, and to hide her vulnerabilities. Accepting Chayton's care and guidance was a leap of trust, a surrender to the possibility of kindness, protection, and even love. It was a moment that marked the beginning of profound change in her life, a moment when fear began to lose its grip, and hope, fragile but persistent, began to grow. In the quiet of the desert, as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Sarah felt a sense of peace she had never known. She knew the road ahead would not be without challenges. Her past, her stepfather, and the hardships of frontier life were still realities she could not ignore. But for the first time, she knew that she did not have to face those challenges alone. With Chayton by her side, she could begin to reclaim a life filled with courage, trust, and the possibility of joy. The turning point had come, not with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but with the quiet intervention of a man who recognized her worth and refused to let harm continue. In that moment, Sarah's life shifted from mere survival to the beginning of a new chapter, one where protection, guidance, and trust could finally take root. And in that new chapter, the seeds of love began to grow, nurtured by respect, patience, and shared understanding. After the confrontation at the cabin, Sarah's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The fear that had been her constant companion seemed to ease slightly, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. For the first time in years, she could walk outside without flinching at every shadow, without expecting harm to come at her from every direction. Chaitin had not only protected her in that one moment, but had opened the door to a life that offered guidance, learning, and the possibility of belonging. Chaitin invited Sarah to come with him to his settlement in the mountains, a place where he had lived quietly for years. It was a small community, made up of a few families who respected each other and lived in harmony with the land. The homes were simple, constructed from wood and stone, with gardens and small plots of farmland nearby. Water from the streams and creeks sustained the community, and everyone contributed to the work needed to survive. Sarah had never seen a life like this before, organized, cooperative, and filled with quiet purpose. At first, Sarah felt nervous about leaving the cabin and her siblings. She worried about what might happen to them without her constant care, and she feared the unknowns of Chaitin's settlement. But Chaitin reassured her gently. "Your family is strong, and you will always have a place here when you need it," he said. "This is not about leaving them behind. It is about learning, growing, and finding safety for yourself. Only then can you help others with strength." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to accompany him. The journey to the mountains was long and often difficult. The desert stretched endlessly, and the sun blazed during the day while the nights grew cold. Chaitin taught her to observe the land carefully, to read the signs left by animals, and to find safe paths that avoided danger. Every step was a lesson, and Sarah absorbed them quickly. She discovered that survival was not only about endurance, but also about understanding the rhythms of nature, respecting its power, and moving with intention. When they arrived at the settlement, Sarah was struck by the sense of community. People greeted them warmly, with quiet smiles and respectful nods. They noticed her cautious movements, the way she kept to herself at first, and welcomed her without pressure or judgment. Chaitin introduced her to the families, explaining her story briefly and emphasizing her courage. The response was one of quiet acceptance. People offered guidance, shared knowledge, and extended friendship, allowing Sarah to find her place gradually. Sarah quickly learned the ways of the settlement. She was taught how to hunt and gather food, how to prepare meals from what the land provided, and how to care for animals. She learned to craft tools, mend clothing, and even build small structures. Every task was challenging, but with each success, she felt a growing sense of confidence. For the first time, she realized that she was capable of more than mere survival. She could thrive in a world that demanded skill, patience, and understanding. Chaitin remained a steady presence throughout this process, offering instruction without judgment. He respected her limits, encouraged her independence, and guided her when she faltered. He taught her not only practical skills, but also lessons about patience, observation, and the importance of community. Sarah came to understand that strength was not only measured by what one could endure alone, but also by how one could contribute, learn, and support others. Despite the hard work, life in the settlement offered moments of peace and joy that Sarah had never experienced. She marveled at the stars in the clear night sky, which seemed closer and brighter than she had ever imagined. She laughed quietly with other women in the community, sharing stories and learning traditions that had been passed down for generations. She discovered the simple pleasures of fresh food, clean water, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. For the first time, she could rest without fear, even if only for a few hours each night. Over time, Sarah began to notice subtle changes within herself. The tension in her shoulders, the cautious way she moved, and the constant fear in her eyes began to ease. She felt a growing sense of self-worth, not only because Chaitin had protected her, but because she had proven to herself that she could adapt, learn, and contribute to a community. She realized that she no longer needed to live in constant vigilance. She could trust herself, and she could trust those around her. Chayton and Sarah spent long hours together, working side by side in the fields, along the streams, and in the homes of the settlement. Their conversations grew deeper and more personal, though always respectful. They spoke of their pasts, of loss, and of lessons learned from hardship. Chayton shared the story of his own family, lost to circumstances beyond his control, and Sarah found comfort in his honesty. She realized that he, too, had endured pain, and yet he had chosen a path of patience, teaching, and quiet leadership. Through these interactions, Sarah began to see Chayton not only as a protector and teacher, but as a companion. She admired his wisdom, his calm strength, and his gentle way of guiding others. She found herself seeking his counsel, valuing his opinion, and feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the patience he had shown her. Slowly, the bond between them strengthened into trust, respect, and an unspoken connection that went beyond words. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's skills and confidence grew steadily. She became an active member of the settlement, contributing to work, helping others, and even teaching younger children how to read the land and care for animals. She felt a profound sense of belonging, something she had never known in her previous life. The fear that had once dominated her days was replaced by purpose, community, and the quiet joy of mastery over her environment. The settlement itself became a source of inspiration and learning. Sarah observed how families worked together, how traditions were respected, and how challenges were met collectively. She learned the value of cooperation, patience, and empathy, realizing that a strong community could offer protection, knowledge, and support far beyond what one person could provide alone. This understanding transformed her perspective on life, giving her confidence that she could face challenges not as an isolated individual, but as part of a larger, caring group. Chayton continued to guide her, always with patience and respect. He noticed her growing strength and encouraged her independence, never imposing his will or demanding obedience. Their partnership became one of mutual respect and quiet understanding. Sarah began to realize that he had not only rescued her from physical danger, but had also nurtured her spirit, helping her find confidence, hope, and a sense of purpose she had never known before. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in a garden, Chayton spoke gently. "You have come a long way, Sarah. You are no longer the same young woman who arrived here. You carry strength, skill, and wisdom that others can rely on." Sarah looked up at him, feeling a warmth she could hardly describe. I feel different," she admitted. "I feel like I belong here, like I have a place where I can be useful, respected, and safe." Chayton nodded, smiling softly. "That is what life can offer when we find the right path and the right companions." "You have earned this, Sarah, through your courage, patience, and willingness to learn." The growing bond between them was not only practical but emotional. Sarah felt gratitude, admiration, and a sense of connection that went beyond mere friendship. She began to understand the meaning of partnership, working together, supporting one another, and valuing the presence of someone who understood and respected her. This realization gave her hope for a future she had never dared to imagine, one in which safety, trust, and even love could coexist. As the months passed, Sarah's new life became a rhythm of learning, work, and quiet reflection. She observed the changing seasons, the migration of animals, and the patterns of weather that guided life in the settlement. She became skilled in hunting, gardening, and caring for animals, and she shared her knowledge with others who were willing to learn. Her confidence grew steadily, and with it, her sense of freedom, a freedom she had never known under the shadow of her stepfather's anger. Through it all, Chayton remained a steady, guiding presence. He taught her patience, observation, and respect for the land and people around her. He showed her that strength could be quiet, and that leadership could be gentle yet firm. Sarah found inspiration in his example, learning that life could be endured, enjoyed, and shared when approached with understanding and care. By the time the first snow fell in the mountains, covering the landscape with a blanket of white, Sarah felt transformed. She had discovered courage, skill, and purpose. She had found a community that valued her, a mentor who guided her, and a companion who respected and protected her. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace, balance, and belonging. Life in the settlement was not without challenges, but Sarah faced them with confidence, knowing she had both the skills and the support to overcome obstacles. Her past, once filled with fear and suffering, had shaped her strength, but it no longer controlled her. With Chayton by her side and the community around her, she could navigate the world with wisdom, courage, and hope for a future filled with promise. As the seasons changed in the mountains, Sarah Thompson felt a deep sense of transformation within herself. The young woman who had once feared every shadow and flinched at every raised voice had grown into someone strong, skilled, and confident. She had endured hardships that might have broken others, yet through patience, learning, and the support of Chayton and the settlement, she had discovered a life of purpose, safety, and even quiet joy. Her days were filled with meaningful work and the comforting rhythm of community life. Mornings were spent tending the gardens, gathering fresh water from the creek, and helping care for animals. Afternoons were for learning new skills, exploring the surrounding lands, and sharing knowledge with others. Evenings were calm, often spent by the fire, listening to the stories of elders or practicing her own storytelling. The harshness of her past seemed distant, though never forgotten, and Sarah carried its lessons quietly, using them to guide her choices and deepen her understanding of the world. Chayton remained by her side throughout this transformation. He was not only her protector and mentor, but also a source of friendship and companionship that she had never known before. Their bond had grown steadily, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. Sarah admired his wisdom, his patience, and the way he moved through the world with quiet strength. She realized that he had not only helped her survive, but had shown her how to thrive, how to embrace life fully, even after enduring years of hardship. Over time, Sarah noticed feelings growing within her that she had not anticipated. She realized that she felt a deep sense of care and affection for Chayton, feelings that went beyond gratitude and friendship. When he smiled, she felt warmth in her chest. When he spoke, she listened more attentively than to anyone else. She found herself seeking his presence, valuing his opinion, and feeling comforted simply by being near him. It was a new and gentle discovery, one that both excited and frightened her, because she had spent so long guarding her heart. Chayton, too, began to show his own feelings, though in quiet, respectful ways. He offered guidance without imposing, protection without control, and companionship without demand. He shared his stories, his knowledge, and his wisdom, slowly allowing Sarah to understand not only who he was, but also how deeply he cared for her. The trust between them grew naturally, forming a foundation that neither fear nor hardship could easily shake. As the days passed, Sarah began to feel a sense of peace that she had never known. She realized that safety, trust, and belonging were not distant dreams but tangible realities in her life. The lessons she had learned from Chayton and the settlement, skills, patience, observation, and resilience, had given her confidence. She now moved through the world with purpose, no longer as a young woman defined by fear, but as someone capable of facing challenges with courage and wisdom. The relationship between Sarah and Chayton was not marked by dramatic declarations or hurried decisions. Instead, it grew steadily, like a river carving its path through the landscape, slow, persistent, and quietly powerful. They worked together in the gardens, hunted together in the forests, and shared quiet moments by the creek. In every action, there was a deep respect for each other's abilities, a recognition of each other's strengths, and an understanding that partnership was built on equality and trust. Sarah's connection with the other members of the settlement deepened as well. She taught younger children how to care for animals, helped neighbors with gardening and cooking, and shared her growing knowledge of the land. Through these actions, she discovered a sense of fulfillment and purpose she had never known in her previous life. Her contributions were valued, her presence respected, and her voice heard. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be part of a community, not merely surviving but thriving alongside others who cared for her as she cared for them. In the quiet moments of reflection, Sarah thought often of her past. She remembered the fear, the beatings, and the long days filled with worry. She acknowledged the pain but did not allow it to define her present. Instead, she saw those experiences as the foundation for her strength, teaching her resilience, patience, and the value of hope. She realized that every hardship she had endured had prepared her for this life, one in which she could finally experience safety, companionship, and even love. Chaitin encouraged her reflection, often speaking gently about the importance of understanding one's past while embracing the present. "We are shaped by what we endure," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, "but we are not defined by it. Life offers new paths, and it is up to us to walk them with courage and care." Sarah absorbed his words, feeling a sense of clarity she had never experienced before. She understood that she could honor her past without being trapped by it, that she could face the future with confidence, and that the love and trust she felt for Chaitin were natural extensions of the security, respect, and care he had shown her. One crisp morning, as the first snow began to settle on the mountains, Sarah and Chaitin set out together to check the traps they had placed for small game. The air was clear, and the snow-covered landscape sparkled under the early sunlight. As they walked side by side, Sarah realized that she felt a deep sense of contentment she had never known in her previous life. Every step, every breath, and every shared glance reinforced the bond they had formed. "You have come far," Chaitin said, his voice calm but filled with warmth. "You are no longer the young woman who feared shadows. You carry strength, wisdom, and kindness, and you bring light to those around you." Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude and affection. "I could not have done this without you," she said softly. "You have taught me not only how to survive, but how to live with hope and confidence." Chaitin nodded. "And you have taught me too," he replied. "You have shown courage, resilience, and the ability to embrace change. Life is richer when we walk it together." The acknowledgement of their shared journey deepened their bond even further. Sarah understood that their connection was not simply about protection or guidance, but about companionship, mutual respect, and the quiet power of trust. They had both endured hardship, learned from it, and emerged stronger together. In that realization, Sarah found a sense of love that was patient, enduring, and built on the foundation of shared experiences and respect. As winter progressed, Sarah continued to grow within the community. She celebrated the changing seasons, learned new skills, and deepened her understanding of the land. She found joy in the simple pleasures, watching the sunrise over snow-dusted mountains, listening to children's laughter, and sharing meals with neighbors. Every day reinforced the knowledge that she had found a home, not just a shelter, but a place where she could belong fully and contribute meaningfully. The life she had built with Chaitin and the settlement was far removed from the fear and suffering of her past. Yet she honored those memories, knowing they had shaped the woman she had become. She carried them not as burdens, but as lessons, proof that resilience, patience, and hope could lead to a life filled with trust, care, and even love. In the evenings, Sarah and Chaitin often sat by the fire, sharing stories, planning for the future, and simply enjoying each other's presence. The quiet companionship, free from judgment or fear, allowed Sarah to reflect on how far she had come. She understood now that true strength was not only measured by endurance, but also by the ability to trust, to love, and to embrace the opportunities life offered. Over time, Sarah realized that her journey, from a young woman enduring hardship to someone who had found safety, purpose, and companionship, was a testament to her resilience and the power of kindness and trust. Chaitin had entered her life at a critical moment, offering protection, guidance, and care. But it was her courage, adaptability, and willingness to embrace change that had allowed her to thrive. One clear winter morning, Sarah walked to the edge of the settlement, looking out over the snow-covered valley below. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for the safety she had found, for the lessons she had learned, and for the man who had guided her through the darkest parts of her life. She knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time she felt fully equipped to face them. She carried not fear but hope, confidence, and a deep sense of belonging. Sarah Thompson had endured unimaginable hardship, but through patience, trust, and guidance, she had found a life filled with purpose, community, and love. Her story became a quiet testament to the power of resilience and the importance of kindness, teaching her, and those around her, that even in the harshest landscapes, hope could take root and flourish. And as she walked back to Chaitin, who waited with a gentle smile and an outstretched hand, Sarah understood fully that her life had changed forever. She had found protection, guidance, community, and love. The young woman who had once endured daily hardship now stood strong, confident, and ready to embrace every challenge and joy the world could offer. In that moment, she felt whole, grounded, and at peace, truly at home in the life she had built.